Welcome, General Jones. I'm very pleased that you had you agreed to take some answers and some questions from us. I understand that you haven't been recently to Bulgaria. You've been here several years ago when Ambassador Rice was here.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years since I've been back, yeah.
Good. We expect that we'll find new opportunities for you to come here. I
Well,
basically,
I've spent a lot of time in the region working on the Three Seas initiative, which I think you're familiar with.
yeah, it's a very important initiative. Well,
Yeah.
let's kick off with a question about the impact and the lessons learned from the COVID crisis and its impact on essential security systems, including NATO at institutional, also individual level, because security is not always interpreted just on a national level. So the response to this crisis was somewhat alarming when we all of a sudden understood and apprehended the impact on which China is able to control essential parts of our responses to the COVID crisis. I just recall, and it was a rather bizarre experience to see Europe and the United States competing for Chinese masks and essential medical equipment. Luckily, that was in the early days. Later on, things improved. And as a matter of fact, a U.S. military cargo plane brought here some masks and essential equipment from China. How would you interpret this, and how would you comment on this?
Well, I think that going back 10 and 15 years, we have generally been asleep with regard to China. Been focused on Afghanistan, Iraq, the Middle East, and other things. But where China has been concerned, they've gotten what I would call a free pass to do a lot of things that are now coming to light in our societies as to exactly what their long-term strategic goal is, which is, frankly, domination. I'm not one who thinks that we're headed for any kind of World War III with China, but we obviously are in a time when we should ask ourselves, are we going back to a bipolar world with China on one end and the US on the other instead of the Soviet Union? And if so, what does that mean for all of us? And we have, at least in our country, I think we've really been asleep for too long, thinking that the incompatibility between a communist government and a relatively free market would eventually cause China to see the wisdom of democratic processes. That has not proven to be the case, and I think the coronavirus and China's shameful role in how it rolled out has basically caused people to look at China in a different way. In our country, we have found out that over 90% of our pharmaceuticals are manufactured in China, and people are outraged by that. And and a lot of companies now are looking at coming home. We know that China has profited by its cyber spying without any penalties, really, to speak of, except for occasional headlines and criticism. But this has been a windfall for China as it develops itself into the world's other superpower, and it's something that to me is personally very concerning, and I think we should all be extremely careful. And nowhere is this more evident than in the cybersecurity world, where Huawei is making its inroads thanks to Chinese government sponsorship, and the West is still looking for an appropriate response, which is something that troubles me a great deal, because the security aspects of this particular race are enormous in terms of who's going to be so influential in the world to come.
Okay, one thing that has always surprised me over the years, well, that is not only a legacy. If China controls, for example, over 30% of the world's rare earth metal reserves and determines prices in essential commodities on the global market, which in most cases are critical. Whether the price go up and down, that impacts tremendously economic recovery, particularly after the recession in some NATO countries. But it's not only the macroeconomic effect. If computing power and basically high tech recently is very much dependent on, including the renewable energy sources. They're very much dependent on rare earth metals, and this control of China is very concerning. You mentioned Huawei and ZTE with the 5G, which is absolutely essential. The problem for most of my compatriots, and I think Europeans, is okay, we don't buy 5G. What do we buy instead?
So to your point, to your first point about Chinese expansion, from 2003 until 2007, I was the NATO Supreme Allied Commander, and I was also the commander of all U.S. forces in Europe and Africa. And that's when I first really started to understand the depth of Chinese strategy. It really started for me in Africa, and I've watched it expand to other parts of the world, including our own hemisphere. And we were slow in reacting to that, to be honest with you. The Chinese theology or the methodology is basically to penetrate. Once you have a penetration in a company, and they do that through economic incentives to include bribery and corruption, but whatever it takes to penetrate. Once penetrated, they expand their footprint, and then they dominate. They try to dominate the political discourse, and they've been very good at this. They're allies of the United States that are dominated economically up to 28 to 30% by Chinese companies, and they're now facing the what I call phase 3, which is the dominance into the political and diplomatic strategy, so to speak. On 5G, it's the classic case of how China has managed to get a significant head start for a couple of reasons. One is it's state-sponsored. Number two is it's very cheap. As a matter of fact, they probably sell it at a loss. But what they want to achieve is penetration. But what they won't give you is they won't give you access to the technology, maintenance of the technology, the keys, the codes, the crypto. All of that is, all of that is done by Chinese generosity, but which really puts our Western democratic countries at risk. And by the way, it's not just in Europe. Huawei managed to penetrate the rural sectors of our own country in the United States. And we are now engaged in a program called Rip and Replace, which means remove the Huawei equipment and replace it with something else. I'm very happy to be able to say that the U.S. has developed a technology that is suited for democracies, and it does provide security, it does provide impenetrability, and at least for now, it cannot be reverse engineered. And we think that the United States should advertise this technology, working with our European friends, particularly NATO, because the security aspects of the rest of the century are so dominant. And what we're talking about is not just 5G, but secure 5G, and secure 5G both in the security, military security sector, but also in the private sector, in banks and economic markets, hospitals, and the like, and also right down to the individual whose telephone should be secure and private. And so that's really the contest here. I'm hopeful that the U.S. will announce its support for the kind of technology that I know is here. We're working with the government officials to do that, but we're also working with countries in your region and also Western Europe, NATO, individually, to make sure that they know that this capability is out there, and it's a question of all of us coming together and agreeing to develop this technology together. And by that I mean that big European companies like Nokia and Ericsson and the like should be welcome to the table as we protect ourselves from this intrusive Chinese technology that really puts everybody at risk.
General Jones, I believe that we have a very good case with how the private business entered the space program, and actually it boosted the leadership of the United States over Russia and other countries, China as well. And in that particular case with the 5G technology that you is developing, are we talking about something that would be competing with Huawei, or it would be entirely, it would basically block the ability of the Huawei technology to inflict damage on the cybersecurity systems, or it would be a 6G, later generation?
Well, the technology that I'm familiar with is very revolutionary, because you can apply it to legacy systems. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you're in a 4G network right now and you apply this technology to it, it'll be secure, impenetrable, and you can't reverse engineer it. But you can apply it to the systems that you currently have. As each country decides to go to 5G at its own pace, it would save a lot of money. But the idea would be that this would compete directly with Huawei, and it would offer sovereignty, data sovereignty, to anyone who uses it. And that's the difference between the communist system and a democracy. We would want, I think, our friends and allies to be able to know that their data is secured, that they manage their keys, the codes, and the crypto, and no one else has access to it.
Okay, just two more questions before we adjourn. It's the Newswire has brought fresh news that a new type of swine flu virus could cause a new pandemic. The threat is not only confined to livestock breeding, to humans, but also to livestock breeding. So there we come to an entirely new dimension of the impact on the COVID-19 crisis, and all similar viruses on the food supplies all over the world, which is a major security risk. And I think that has been an area which has been slightly overlooked. One of the spots of contagion in Germany is a meat processing plant, which might impact directly some of the food supply chains. I suspect there has been a similar concern in the United States over the dramatic decrease in capacity or impact on productivity of some meat processing plants as well. Do you believe that we can, and it's not only food supply, but it is very, very down to the individual level of apprehension of how the crisis can impact human lives. Do you believe that the U.S. would take the leadership in the global response because as you know, the European Union is, until recently, has preferred a regional approach?
You know, I believe that the relationship between the U.S. and Europe is the most important relationship that we have. I'm a big believer in the transatlantic link. I'm a big believer in NATO. I'm a big believer in working together to solve common problems. And I think the United States has a moral obligation to provide, where it can, provide leadership, but in a partnering way with our European friends. Now, for my money, the defense of Europe literally starts at the Black Sea and in the Baltic regions now. It's no longer Germany. But that's the kind of a classic 20th century reaction to what Russia under Vladimir Putin is doing. But the degree of engagement that we're all seeing now is much more than just military. It relates to what you just talked about. It relates to the cybersecurity. It relates to the climate, our global health problems, and the like. And I do think that my country has an obligation to be, where it can, if it can lead, to actually step forward and say, we can do this, and to share our technologies with our friends and allies in a humanitarian sense, even with people who are not friendly to us. But, you know, people talk about 5G, but they really should be talking about secure 5G, because the security of the network is what's going to enable smart cities, enable us to be secure from outside attacks. I mean, think about a company like Mercedes-Benz in Germany, who could actually be sure that its intellectual properties are secure. That is possible right now, but it's going to take U.S. Participation, U.S. leadership, in conjunction with our European friends and allies. And if we do this together, I think we're going to be fine. Whether it's about food or water, whether it's about space, whether it's about banks and hospitals, or our basic security from a military perspective. But the contest is going to be much broader than just that, and I think China has figured that out. I don't think China has any intention in getting into a war in a 20th century sense, but very much intends on competing. And we've seen that since the pandemic started in Wuhan. We've seen that behavior reinforced, and so maybe one good thing is that we know what China is and we know what China isn't. We also know what Russia is and what Russia isn't, and together I think we can prevail.
And the final question, I don't know whether you're following close events in the region, but basically Chinese influence has not particularly concerned Bulgaria so far. Actually, the most prominent case of a potential new overlay of Russian and Chinese influence would have been the nuclear power plant Belene, which in itself is quite a security threat in all dimensions. But their main basis now, or at least recently, has been in Serbia or Hungary or even Greece. So we're a little bit spared of this. But Chinese companies are coming in big numbers in the last years. And that's why I'm trying to ask the policy of the U.S. administration is, I'm not talking about pulling out troops in Germany, because if they're pulled out of Germany, but if they're relocated elsewhere in Central and Eastern Europe, that would not particularly impact the overall security strategy of NATO. But I'm concerned with the somewhat different approach. For example, energy security is on top of the agenda of NATO, and the US has imposed sanctions on the Nord Stream. It has also imposed sanctions on the Turk Stream, but it somehow, the Nord Stream sanctions is a very prominent feature of US foreign policy. Turk Stream sanctions are not particularly anywhere to be seen as in a more detailed manner in specific acts and steps of US diplomacy. How would you interpret this?
So for the last several years, I was the chairman of the Atlantic Council of the United States, and in 2014, in partnership with some Polish friends, we came out with a manuscript that is now referred to as the Three Seas Initiative. And the Three Seas Initiative is essentially a mini Marshall Plan for Central and Eastern Europe. We all know that since the end of World War II, the Soviets built everything they built infrastructure-wise was east to west, very little north to south. This Three Seas Initiative proposes and has right now a 12-country membership in Central and Eastern Europe, supported by the United States with $1 billion committed to it this year on energy alone. But it has three features to it. One is energy, two is transportation, meaning roads, high-speed rail and the like, airports, and three is telecommunications, the cyber world. And I'm very excited to be able to report to you and your viewers that this past year we've gone from theory to actual implementation. It is sanctioned by the EU. Even Germany has volunteered, I think, to become at least a supporter of it. The German support for Nord Stream 2 is a little bit surprising to me because you can't have it both ways. And it seems to me that's a mistake. The U.S. is definitely on board with the Three Seas Initiative. And as I said, is going to contribute up to $1 billion, assuming that everybody else in the consortium will kick in the same amount. But we definitely, the idea for the Three Seas Initiative was to help Central and Eastern Europe not be so dependent on Vladimir Putin's
energy.
How shall we say it? His tendencies to play with energy sources for Europe in general, and Eastern Europe in particular. So this is something that's really going on. It's very exciting for the region. I think it will expand. And Estonia is the host country for this year's meeting, which will happen sometime in August or September. And the 12 countries will assemble. We will look at what projects we have. Last time I looked, there were 57 different projects. But energy is clearly one, and it's one that the United States is, I'm very happy to say, is very much on board with.
Thank you very much, General Jones, for taking the time to talk to us and our viewers, and I hope to see you in Sofia, well, after COVID, because this crisis has severed all links, and even people are finding it very difficult to travel. Anyhow, September and October are a good time, and if you come to Europe, please put one more flag on your itinerary.
Thank you so much, and we would love to receive you in Washington at the Atlantic Council. If you're in town, we'd love to have you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.